getting big ticket free agents. I mean, sometimes that's not realistic in a certain market, but if you manage to get guys to want to come there, and particularly if that's in a market that isn't, traditionally the sun and sand type of markets, I definitely will give you a lot of credit.
What
for
if
that.
you do that and it ends up being one of the worst signings in NBA history?
Welcome on to Hollinger and Duncan, where someone who once was an executive and someone who once wanted to be an executive and never will be are going to rank all 30 organizations and tell them what they're doing right and wrong. So I hope everyone appreciates that. But hey, if we're not going to do it, who will, right?
Exactly. Plus, this is this is very fun and cathartic for, I think, fans of certain teams, especially teams who will probably not get to until the second or third round of this exercise.
Yeah, so before we begin here, John, what are some of the factors that we are including here? And I'll begin by saying this doesn't include the coach. We rank this as organizations because it's ownership, it's management, but not the coach. The owner and management hire the coach. So you also don't want to rank general managers or presidents of basketball operations because they're just part of the whole. So I think it's easier to rank the organization because then there's no question about whether one person has responsibility, one person's doing a good job, the owner's doing a bad job, the GM is fighting against the owner. No, it's just what have you put on paper as an organization?
Yes, and I think that's easier because we tend to think that individual general managers operate the way we operate our fantasy teams, and that's not really how it works. And you sort of you have to carry the assumption that you don't know what went on in the meeting. Organizations don't necessarily move in lockstep. There are disagreements. It's rare that you all walk out of a room and it's, the vote is unanimous to go in one direction or another, especially in a, shall we say, non-obvious situation. So, ownership has its say, and that varies by organization. The GM has its say. Sometimes the coach has input. Sometimes other people in the organization have different levels of input. So just evaluating the body of work, I think, is actually an easier way to do it than saying this particular GM.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, of course, transactions will be included, right? Free agency, where getting big ticket free agents, I mean, sometimes that's not realistic in a certain market, but if you manage to get guys to want to come there, and particularly if that's in a market that isn't, traditionally the sun and sand type of markets, I definitely will give you a lot of credit.
What if you do that and it ends up being one of the worst signings in NBA history? Can't think of an example, just hypothetically.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be a huge feather in the cap. But if you also were to acquire, the best defensive wing in the league for nothing, that's pretty good too, right? So, if you're able to get a near all-star level point guard on a $10 million a year contract, that's something that adds up as well. So signings, re-signings, extensions, obviously are even more important as of now. What are some of the other factors we're going to look at?
Roster management, organizational stability, I think, is important. Ownership, willingness to invest in the product.
Definitely.
Which definitely varies by market here. And overall sense of strategic direction and
yes, vision. That's what I have written down here.
Yeah. Like, are they just throwing stuff at the wall, or is there actually some kind of plan here to get from A to B?
Well, and maybe not only get from A to B, but get from A to Z, right? To actually really matter in the league as opposed to
chasing the play-in.
Precisely. Yeah. Player development also is big. Now that's subject. All of these are subject to a relatively small sample size, And sometimes, if things just didn't work out, if there wasn't, you made a move and you got unlucky, we'll try to account for that. But if the move that we thought was terrible at the time turned out to be terrible, that's going to get you a lot of negative points. Hiring a coach, certainly a big part of that. Synergy with said coach, just your overall organizational process, having like a deep bench in your front office. I think if you have been an organization that has produced a lot of people who have gone other places and gone on to greater success other places, you certainly get credit. If you embrace a more modern way of thinking, analytics in your decision making, it will give you points there. What else am I missing?
Salary cap management.
Yes.
Understanding
yes.
and optimizing it.
Yeah. No, that's huge. And sadly, we probably should add this as a component too. Like if your organization is just doing some kind of evil stuff, we're because the ultimate
penalty.
Yeah, the ultimate criteria here are who do we want stewarding our team if we're a fan of a random team, right? So and some teams, of course, have better markets that they're working with. But if you put that management group somewhere where they don't have that advantage, what do you think it might look like? So certainly taking advantage of the circumstances that you're in, you deserve credit there. But let's say you're an organization that's not willing to spend even in a big market. Shit, what would you look like in a small market, right? That's certainly a something you have to consider and will consider for two specific organizations going forward here. So that's basically where we're coming from here. John, give me your number one organization in the NBA.
I went back and forth over this between two teams who have met in 3 of the last 4 Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah.
And ultimately, even though it's a shorter track record, I don't know what the Celtics have missed on since Brad Stevens went upstairs. And so that to me, it was hard to take them over Miami when Miami's body of work is over such a huge number of years. But I can also look at Miami, the roster even now, and nitpick some things and say, okay, they probably regret that, and that. It's just really hard to do that with Boston. The Derek White trade was tremendous, and the timing was tremendous. The Smart extension, and then having the Stones to trade him, seemingly right at the point where his value was about to go off the cliff, was brilliant. The whole process of getting Horford back and extending him. The Porzingis trade, even the Pritchard extension, I just think they haven't really missed, and I think other teams is pretty easy to point out, even over the same time period, some things that are already pretty clear misses. They handled the Udoka thing. They brought in Mazzulla, which I think was controversial at the time, and I think he's turned out to be a pretty good coach. And will probably continue to improve as he gets his sea legs there. So,
well, he did have the greatest coaching moment in NBA history on Tuesday night. So I think it's pretty much a wrap that he's amazing.
Yes. As an in-season tournament enthusiast, that was the only correct answer right there.
The one nitpick you could have maybe is the Udoka thing, although the Udoka hire as an actual coach was fantastic, and I'm guessing there wasn't any background indicating that he, had engaged in that sort of behavior at other organizations, and I do think that they dealt with it appropriately when it was a really difficult situation, and
more proactively than almost any other organization would have, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, because we talked about it at the time from an HR, like actual being a real, business situation, like you can't have that going on. Like you need to move on from him because there are then results for the other person in the organization, if he's still around, that you just from like a legal perspective, you can't deal with. So yeah, I mean, and Udoka, I mean, he's proving in Houston again that he's a pretty darn good coach. And yeah, I think Missoula, like having Missoula there was useful. I think they've strengthened his bench now. So some people might say Joe Missoula is like not that great. I just, it wasn't realistic to hire another coach 2 days before training camp or whatever it was last year. Maybe you would say they should have moved faster on that, or they should have tried to, but there wasn't an indication that things had kind of went wrong in what apparently was a consensual relationship before that. So and that's, that's a piece. It's not, the number one thing, but yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And the biggest thing that I give them credit for, and this goes back to the Danny Ainge era too, but they just have some balls as an organization. When you think about, I mean, going back to the Kemba Walker trade, right? Like they brought in Kemba Walker and they might have been like, after 2 years, we feel like he's just, he had a rough year last year with his knees. And they're like, no, we are getting
easy
off
to make
of this.
to make the excuses. Yeah.
Yeah. But they knew, all right, he's probably done. Marcus Smart. I mean, I'm not going to say he got injured in Memphis, but he clearly was kind of on the downside. They did the Branch Rickey, trade a guy a year early as opposed to a year late. Rob Williams, another guy who just like couldn't necessarily stay healthy. Same with Malcolm Brogdon, who helped them certainly last year. But to move on from these guys that still had value to get better players, I really struggle to think. And Derek White, like he's been amazing for them. Like he's a completely undervalued guy as well. And so I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, maybe the Jaylen Brown extension could be something that they might regret, and they've got this financial apocalypse coming also. But I think
be interesting
as of now,
to see how they handle that, because not the most deep pocketed ownership, even though they're in a pretty big market and they're the Celtics or whatever. They actually don't really control their own building, which is unusual.
Yeah.
And so I think they're a little bit less profitable because of that. Now they have been willing to spend a little more, right? They're going to end up this year probably around 18 million over the tax line. Pay a pretty big penalty because of that. Going to do the same next year. Probably going to keep doing that in the out years as long as they have Tatum and Brown on these contracts. So we'll see with the repeater and whatnot how they manage that and how cheap they end up being, I guess, while they have a really good team. So that's going to be the next test for these guys.
Yeah, now I don't view them as like one of the like crazy spenders, but they're kind of in the next tier down, I would say, right? I mean, they're not. I struggle to think of any moves they've made that are just like total cost cutting moves that have messed them up a little bit, and that's maybe a little bit in contrast to Miami, who, like you, I had as the other team in my top tier. But yeah, I mean the Stevens era, and who would have thought that, right? We thought, the theory I had at least when they hired him was, well, he's still under contract. He doesn't want to coach anymore. So, all right, just go be the GM so we don't have to pay you your huge salary to not do anything, right? And he's been amazing. And even, Danny Ainge, I think, is still doing a pretty darn good job in Utah, but maybe there's a feeling like, I mean, that's another thing, honestly, like a lot of teams might not have kind of pushed Danny Ainge out a little bit. I think they felt like they may not be right about this, but they felt like he'd kind of run his course in Boston, and they went another direction. And I mean, I think Brad Stevens, for where the team was, like Danny Ainge was like always kind of playing the long game, didn't want to make the big move. So, in terms of trades, and Brad Stevens, of course, has been extremely aggressive for where they are. Granted, they are in a different place now than they were 2-3 years ago with Tatum now fully in his prime. Same with Brown. So yeah, I went with Boston number one. I think I was torn as well. I think this discussion has kind of pushed me to have them number one now.
All right, outside hand. Okay. Ooh, I froze.
Yeah, that's weird.